Hey guys, hope everyone's doing well. My name's Annie and I'm the Green Witch. Today I will be sharing with you my apple pie recipe, which is the greatest apple pie recipe out there. I promise you. It's a lot of work and you really have to be dedicated to complete it and make it as fantastic as it possibly can be. But I promise you, all of these crazy extra steps that you may think are unnecessary are absolutely necessary and are what creates such a beautiful final product. Now, like I said, it is very hands-on and it does take a lot of time to complete, and I mean a lot of time. It actually takes about 2 days to finish. And I know 2 days may seem a little bit outrageous for an apple pie, but you'll see, we'll get through it and you'll understand in the end, I promise. Now, before I jump into it, I have spent a lot of time adapting a handful of recipes to create this one, and in all honesty, I'm still working on it and trying to better it. So maybe I'll do an update one day. I'm pretty sure I have it as close to perfectly right as I would like it to be, but there are a few things that I want to mess with, and I'll explain that later. Now, I make this apple pie a couple times throughout the year, but I always make it for Mabon because it's kind of just that perfect flavor for entering fall. Alrighty, so the first step to this beautiful, amazing apple pie is the crust. And please do not skip on this step. I know you can go to the grocery store and buy a crust that's all perfectly rolled up and easy to lay out and bam, you're done. It's not the same. The crust is part of the beauty of this pie. It's what makes it so good and so delicious. It's just flaky and it's so good. And I know maybe it seems a little intimidating to make your own crust, but it's really not that hard to do. It's just something that takes a little bit of extra time and just understanding how the ingredients work. And I'll make sure to explain all the steps that make it a lot easier so that you don't feel lost or confused. So for the crust, you're gonna need 2 cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, 10 tablespoons of butter, and make sure that your butter is as cold as humanly possible. This will be super helpful and it will make it way flakier and beautiful in the end. I actually, after I've cubed the butter, tend to put it in the freezer for 10 to 15 minutes just to add even a little bit more cold to it. You're also going to need 2 egg yolks and 4 teaspoons of ice water. And once again, that ice is important. Make sure it's ice water, not just warm, lukewarm water. Cold as possible. This will make it far easier to work with. Okay, so once you've gathered your ingredients, it's time to jump in. First, mix together the ice water and the egg yolks and set aside. Next, you're going to combine the flour and the butter. Personally, I like to use my hands and just pinch the butter with my fingertips into the flour. It helps to incorporate it pretty well, and the warmth from your fingers will be enough to melt it into it. Make sure that you don't use the palms of your hand. It's a little too warm and it'll make it a little too melty and harder to work with. I'm going to add the salt at this stage as well. Then once it's fully incorporated, begin adding the egg yolk and ice water mixture. Add it slowly and incorporate it maybe a fourth at a time, and make sure you mix it fully before adding any more. You may not have to use all of this mixture, it's just important that you're able to bring the dough into a clump in your hand. Then, once all the ingredients have been added, form the dough ball into a small disc and cover with cling wrap. This will help keep the dough fresh because the next step is to put it in the refrigerator for a couple hours to get it cold again, because you really want this dough as cold as possible. When butter goes from really cold to really hot really fast, it helps to create this really beautiful flaky crust. Sorry, my dog is making a lot of noise. Now, if you would like to add a second crust over the top of your pie, make sure you make one now. Now, after you've put the dough in the fridge, it's time to move on to the next step, making the filling. For this, you're going to need 10 apples, preferably baking apples because they help to hold some crunch and crispness after they've been in the oven for so long. 1 cup of brown sugar, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, 1/3 cup of lemon juice, 3.5 tablespoons of cornstarch, and 3.5 tablespoons of butter. And my secret ingredient, which adds this little bit of oomph that most apple pies don't have, but it's so subtle that you can't really tell what it is, but you know there's something really good happening. And that's 1/2 cup of maple syrup. Now, believe it or not, making the filling is the step that takes the longest, but we'll get into that in a bit. First, of course, you're gonna have to peel the apples. Then once all the apples are peeled, just slice them up. And of course, you have to give a little snitch to your puppy. The slices should be fairly thin, kind of like this. Next, we're going to macerate the apples, which is kind of this big fancy word for just letting them sit in a mixture of sugar and salt and a little bit of cornstarch to let all the juices from them drain out to the bottom. So just add your brown sugar, salt, cinnamon, lemon juice, and about half of your cornstarch. Then mix them up real well And I know in this clip I started with a spoon. I was trying to be kind of classy and cool and nice, but in all honesty, it's just a lot easier to use your hands, and I switched over to that, as you'll see. Make sure it's fully mixed and that each apple is coated in the mixture you've provided. Then cover it up and set it aside, and you won't touch this till tomorrow. You can do this a little quicker. I recommend giving it the full overnight because it does just give you far more juice to work with. But if you're kind of on a crunch for time, you can do it in, as little as 30 minutes to a couple of hours. But anyways, once I've put the apples to the side, I pull my dough back out because it's a little easier to work with. Because if you wait way too long, it gets a little too cold, and that's way too impossible to work with. There's kind of this sweet spot that you want to find where the butter is stiff enough so it's not going to melt and be oily everywhere, but it's not too hard that it isn't malleable. And typically I find it's around this spot after I finish with the apples. Sometimes it's a little easier to pound the dough initially so that it'll be flatter and easier to roll. Then just roll it out, super simple. Then once it's fully rolled out, just gently lay it across your pie dish, then press it carefully into each of the edges. Make sure not to tear it, be gentle, it'll go if you just work with it. Sometimes you may have to press in some seams, but that's no big deal. Then I just trim off the top because personally I just find it's way easier to add a decorative layer around the edge. Then I put it back in the fridge to keep it cool and perfect until tomorrow. Now this next step you can either do the same day you've made the crust or the next day, it doesn't really matter. Kind of just depends on how much time you have. And this is also kind of an optional step. I really recommend it because I think having a crisp, crunchy Dutch topping is just so good and so worth it. But it is up to you. Some people prefer to have a crust. But anyways, for the Dutch crumble topping, you're gonna need half a cup of flour, half a cup of sugar, half a cup of brown sugar, half a cup of oats, 3/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 6 tablespoons of butter. Now, personally, this isn't my favorite crumble topping. This is the thing that I kind of want to work on and mess with. I don't usually settle with just these ingredients. This is kind of my baseline, and then I taste it and mess with it and taste it and mess with it and see how it ends up and what I like. But it's a pretty good basing, and if you want to add more sugar or less sugar or more of some other spice and mess around with it, please feel free to. Because this is kind of just that simple baseline topping that I go with, but I still plan on manipulating it in the future. But this is pretty simple and easy to make. Just start with the dry ingredients in the bowl and add the butter. And similarly to how we did with making the pie crust, just kind of pinch it together with your fingertips. Then once it's all incorporated, I kind of just toss it in the fridge and wait until everything else is ready. And now it's time to wait for tomorrow. Wow, it's the next day, crazy, oh my gosh, I've totally went to bed and woke up and put on the same outfit and hat and everything. Makeup, wow, I know, mad skills. But anyways, now it's the next day and it's time to drain our apples. Please excuse how horribly I filmed this next clip. I don't know what I was thinking, but this was the worst way to ever film it. Typically, I put a strainer on top of a pot and I just pour my apples in, as you can hardly see here. I tend to just let them sit and drain out completely, maybe stir them a couple times, and then I pour the apples back in the bowl that I had them in before. But now you have this pot full of beautiful, caramely, cinnamony, appley juice that is just, oh, it is so good and it smells so good. Now just plop that on top of the burner. Next, I add about 2 tablespoons of water to the remaining cornstarch because it helps make this slurry-like situation that prevents clumps of cornstarch from just circulating around in the apple juice. This should thicken up that apple juice pretty quickly and kind of make it into this caramely, jelly-like thing. So once it's gotten really thick and it's kind of about to boil, don't let it boil. If it boils, it's okay, but try to avoid letting it boil. So right before it's about to, add in your butter, because that'll slow down the cooking process. And then as you're mixing that in, add in the maple syrup. Let it thicken up a little bit. This kind of tends to loosen it a little more, and you want it to be a little bit more of a jelly-like substance. So once all of that's done, pour it over top of your apples and make sure to mix it all together really, really well again. Now it's time to put your pie together. Pull the prepared crust that you made yesterday out of the fridge and set it down in front of you. Then just pour the apples in there. Sometimes I like to try to make it look nice and like layer them fancy because it does help with the, beautiful slice out at the end. But honestly, that's so much work. I just kind of slap them on in. And make sure that you get every last bit of jelly, caramely stuff that you can because that is what's so good. It will kind of stay in between the layers of the apples and create this like thick bunch of flavor. It's incredible. But anyways, once you get all of your apples in there, add your crumble topping. I like to make a pretty thick layer. And then just decorate it as you please. Then once all that's done, if I've added a decorative or crust layer to the top, I add an egg wash and then some coarse sugar. Then if I did what I did today, or with just a crumble topping, I'll cover it with aluminum foil for the first 25 minutes of cooking. But if you just did a crust, it's not necessary to cover it with aluminum foil. Depending on what your topping is, all that business, pop it in the oven at 400 for 50, 55 minutes, sometimes 60, depends on your oven. And then pull it out, let it cool, and enjoy. It's a pretty complicated recipe, and I get that. I know it's kind of a lot to expect people to want to make, but all those extra steps are really worth it. It's what creates such a beautiful final product, and it really does just taste incredible. Thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, let me know in the comments down below. I will have the recipe in the description, and if I do an update, I'll make sure to let you guys know. And yeah, endings, things. I don't know what else to say, so I'll just say bye. Bye. That was weird. That was weird. Oh well. I'll see you soon. Bye. Why are you still itching? All of this Thanks, are you helping? You can lay down. Your tail wagging is